When last we left our heroes, they were on board a sailing ship going for the Southern Isles, trying to find a safe place for a colony or outpost or trading post, some way to connect Krell with the eastern half of the continent. On their way, they went ashore to an island, hunted for some meat, but were ambushed by kobolds. They went back to their ship and it was taken over by kobolds. They had to then rescue the entire ship and become the talk of the crew, as everyone was grateful that they had saved their only way home, this single ship, and the crew were very grateful. Everyone was very relieved that they had managed to do so. They had also leveled up in this process. One of the reasons that they agreed to start at first level was I told them it would be a very short stint that we will be at the early levels. I told them it would be one session at level 1, one session at level 2, and then it would slowly progress until about level 5, and it would slow down there. I think that's a good pace, at least for my style of game. I want to get through the early levels fast to introduce players to the game, but also get to the cool stuff. And so you can cast things like Fireball and be in the second tier. I think that's when players start to really shine in their abilities. So we've leveled up. We're level 2 now. And as the voyage begins anew after leaving the island, they're a few days away from the island that they had visited. And in some morning fog, the ship runs afoul of some reef. And this did a little bit of damage, but not enough to sink the ship by any stretch of the imagination, but enough that it forced the captain to make 2 announcements to the crew. One, they would need to stop at the next island and find some repairs and supplies and manage to fix the ship that way. Also, they needed to stop somewhere and grab updated maps and charts. The stop on the island allowed the PCs to participate by using a skill challenge. I like to use skill challenges. I don't see them used all the time, and without going too in-depth on what they are and how they work, I'm going to explain a little bit about mine and how I use them. Basically, I use a skill challenge to simulate a montage, simulate something that would be tedious to do every single individual role for. So for example, spending the day foraging and scouting for supplies, helping the crew out, repairing the ship, various things like that. Sometimes I see people deploy skill challenges in a weird way. They don't have any concrete results of failure, or if they do, then the failure is catastrophic and there's no salvation from it. So I like to have tangible, but not world-ending results for failure, and I try to tell the players straight up what they are, unless they wouldn't know. And this time I didn't tell the players, but basically I had decided that if the PCs did not accumulate 4 successes before they did accumulate 3 failures, they would be ambushed by some Sahuagin on board the ship, some warlike fish people. So my rules for skill challenges are derived very similarly to Matt Colville's. I basically tell them this is how it's going to work. You're going to try to use skills to overcome some kind of adverse situation or solve a problem that you are in, and you can only attempt a skill that you are proficient in. And once you have attempted that skill, you can't try it again. So somebody else can try the same skill, or you can try a different skill, but you're done with that skill. I give them a couple of examples of skills so that they know what they could use. I try to use the very obvious ones. So for example, like a survival check to find good supplies and wood and resources to use in repair of the ship. But after that, I leave it up to them to figure out how they use the skills. I think that's the fun part of skill challenges, is letting them figure it out. So they were very resourceful in their use of skills. They were using persuasion and performance to bolster the spirits of the crew, as well as perception to help people spot things. I allowed someone to use an insight check to read sort of how bad was the wood, how bad was the injury to the ship, and what would be needed exactly to repair it. I'm not entirely certain that that's the best way to use insight. Maybe I should have used perception, but I thought it would be interesting. The player had a decent reason for why they would use it, and so I said, sure, that's fine with me. So the ship is underway again, and now it is headed to the island of Ostrov, where the tribe known as the Draken live. The Draken, or as they call themselves, the Semya, are a large tribe of Dragonborn that are native to this island. I have a lot of different tribes seeded throughout this environment. One of the interesting things is very, very few of them speak any common at all. They're sort of more rural and separated from the rest of the continent, and so I figure they should talk in almost exclusively their own sort of mother tongue or native language or anything like that. So the Draken tribe speak exclusively Draconic. So they have to take ashore a translator to make sure that they can communicate effectively. Now, the Draken tribe doesn't deal in gold. They don't buy or sell things in that traditional sense. They deal in trade and favors. And so, since the ship doesn't have any trade resources, they just have the food and cargo and supplies necessary to sustain the crew to get them to where they're going and finish their journey. They have nothing to trade except their skills and capabilities. So the captain, who has gone ashore, offers up several of his crew members. Wink, wink, that's the adventure, right? So the captain comes back to his quarters and calls the PCs into his room and says, "Hey, this is the situation. Can you help us out?" And of course, the PCs graciously acquiesce. That's the adventure. That's what they signed up for. The captain gives them a couple of extra hands to help out with the mission. He gives them an elf that they know, a young, naive, energetic elf known as Theron Vale, and also an individual named Callister. Now, Callister is Jason's new character, a bard. Callister is a stowaway on board the ship, and the captain had made a very public example of him early on when he was caught. So the captain is using this sort of as an excuse to see if he can get rid of Callister and say, "Hey, go hang out with these people who are clearly capable and do something way too dangerous for yourself, and maybe I don't have to deal with you anymore, and nature will take you off my hands." So the PCs, the new player character Callister, and this NPC Theron Vale go ashore with a translator and interface a little bit with the tribe and try to figure out exactly what is being asked of them. What have they been signed up for? Well, it turns out that the Draken tribe seem to have had their history, their book, some kind of record of their tribe's history has been taken. There's the translation difference is noticeable, and it's hard to tell exactly the specifics of it, but I know it's a very large record of history. Our history has been stolen. Seems to be what they can gather. And they know for certain that no ships have left the island since it was stolen. They also know that there is a small tribe of kobolds living on the other side of the island. So the Draken people immediately and obviously suspect the kobolds of for some reason taking their book of history or their record of history. And the players think, "Oh cool, more kobolds. Now we're level 2 so we can smoke them this time." The chiefess of the Draken tribe lays out 2 potential routes to get to the other side of the island. They can either go through the swamp or climb over the crags. Now in the swamp, the chiefess warns that there are things called rot grubs. The players have no idea what this is, and she warns that if you ever get bitten by a rot grub, you need to apply fire to the wound immediately because it will begin to burrow into your skin, and if you don't treat it quickly, it will burrow into your heart and kill you. The players were sufficiently freaked out by this when they heard it and thought, "Wait, what? This could just burrow into our hearts and we'll die?" Well, yeah, that's exactly how it works, actually. Now, why would I give them that warning? Well, I saw a rot grub when I was preparing for this session, thought it would be a cool swamp animal that they could interact with, a monster, a vicious little grub. But I also saw that it had that ability to burrow into a heart and kill somebody. With no saving throw, they just die if they get hit by this thing, and figured, I'm okay busting that out, but only if I give players sufficient warning with how to deal with it and how to fix it, because otherwise, with no warning, with no heads up, that seems really brutal to just throw onto a player, and that's not my style at all, so maybe it's yours and that's fine. But I think that would be sort of an underhanded move to send to new players, hey, this thing can, if you get hit by it, will burrow into your heart and you'll die, unless you know the exact right recipe to fix it. So I gave them the exact right recipe and said you need to apply fire to the wound is the greatest way to kill them. However, the other option is not significantly better. Climbing over the crags, the Draken warn, is dangerous because that's where dragons sometimes live. Now the players are only level 2. They are terrified at the potential of meeting a real dragon. The chiefess says that we haven't seen any dragons for a while, but even if you go that way, there are possibly things that feed on or live there in the wake of the refuse and debris of just the dragon's existence. So those things in and of themselves would be scary. We don't ever go that way. Heck, we don't usually go into the swamp. We try to stay here on the coastal side of the island. But the players have a choice. They have a very real crossroads, and a lot of times DMs give players choices that aren't really choice, and say you can go through the forest or cross the bridge, and the DM knows full well that a bandit camp is going to be waiting for them and ambush them either way. And I use that tactic all the time. That's totally fine, totally reasonable, because as long as the players believe that their choices directly affect the outcome, that's what matters. But sometimes for that to be true, I think you have to actually give them two very different courses of action with very different results on either side. So I had two paths prepared with encounters on either side ready for depending on whatever the players chose. And their choice was an interesting one. They chose to sail in their small dinghy as far around the crags as they could and climb up them. Now they were faced with a new problem. How do we climb up 100-foot cliff? As they're in the process of doing just that with rope and clever uses of grappling hooks and helping one another use athletic checks, Callister thought it would be amusing and endearing to use minor illusion to sound like a dragon was roaring ahead over the cliffs. This didn't exactly endear him to the group. However, it did wake up two blue dragon wormlings that were up at the top of the cliff sleeping in their cave. So as the PCs climb up to the top of the cliff, they are met with two blue dragon wormlings, and very, very quickly, combat breaks out. And even more quickly, it is apparent to me that I have no idea how to balance low-level encounters in D&D 5th edition. Because two of these CR3 blue dragon wormlings is going to be a certain TPK against this party of adventurers. I don't know why I thought it would be fine, but I looked at everything and I seem to remember thinking, yeah, this will be hard, but they'll probably be fine. Well, they weren't. However, as things were starting to get dicey, Callister used dissonant whispers on one of the dragons. And the dragon rolled a natural 1. And in my house rules, if you roll a natural 20 on a saving throw against a spell, you take no damage at all. But if you roll a 1, you take maximum damage. So the dragon takes 18 points of psychic damage at this point. But I look down at both of the dragon's hit points and they're both sitting in the 50s. And no PC has enough damage output to survive this fight and do anything to these guys. However, I took the opportunity of the natural 1 rolled against the saving throw, which already caused the dragon to use their reaction to flee. I just played that up a little bit and decided that the natural 1 represented the dragon panicking a little bit, and he fled the battle. This was a first-hand lesson for me and maybe for you on how to balance encounters on the fight when you find out that the encounter is much harder than you intended. I couldn't just roll low for these dragons. That would seem unplausible, unrealistic. But how could I solve the problem of there's two dragons? How do we deal with that? I guess I could have slashed their hit points dramatically, but that didn't feel right either. No, the situation was greatly helped by that natural 1. The dragon just fled. So now the fight turned into a much more reasonable situation with all the PCs and their NPC companion being able to reduce the blue dragon wormling that remained down to a much lower hit point threshold. Before that dragon eventually just decided to peace out, because you don't get to be a 2,000-year-old ancient, fearsome, and powerful being by continuing to fight losing battles. So the PCs are spent and obviously tired, but they continue to argue a little bit about what they should do, because they see down in the valley below them is the ancient ruins where they were told the kobolds seemed to make their camp. But they're very low and they have a good vantage point, so they decide to hang out in the cave where the blue dragons had recently made their nest. There was some argument about this because what if the blue dragons came back? But eventually they decided that if the blue dragons came back, then they would still be low on hit points, but so would the dragons, and maybe it would be more possible of a fight. They would try to keep watch, and hopefully that wouldn't happen. They were sort of rolling the dice on that one. But I knew the situation, and I knew that there was no way the blue dragons were coming back because of the situation that the players were in. That would be a little unsporting based on how difficult a fight it was. So I sort of left it as it was. As they entered this cave, Orar found an item on one of the skeletons that they encountered in the room. It was a small blue wavy ring, thought neat, and pocketed it. The group as a whole also found an enormous blue watermelon-sized gem that they very, very quickly, correctly, determined was a blue dragon egg. So they're very excited by this, but they figure that's tomorrow's problem. Today we have to figure out how we get a long rest and how we safely do that, keeping watch and making sure that we don't get ambushed by blue dragons or by kobolds or anything else that happens to be up here. So they go on watch, they spend their rest, and it was very interesting getting to watch because over the course of the evening, several of the NPCs and PCs who were together got to interact and roleplay a little bit and talk about their background and what they were interested in and liked and disliked. And that was very, very cool, seeing players open up and explore and discover their characters and share that with one another. It was a very exciting time. However, they also managed to spot there was a light on in a building in the apparently not so abandoned ruins. So, in the early hours of the morning, while it was still a little dark, they all got up and went down into the ruins. They separated a little bit to help out the stealthy characters and the non-stealthy characters so that they could not get spotted. And the stealthy characters made their way into the village that was in ruins and found the one building that had been lit up the night before, a small light that went out in the middle of the night. And they peered in the windows, and they looked, and they checked, and they realized very quickly that based on the size and condition of this building, there was no way that a tribe of kobolds lived here. It was too nice, too small, not nearly koboldish enough, they suspected, for it to be a group. There was probably only room for 4 or 5 normal-sized people, so there's no way a large group of kobolds could be living here. So they begin to suspect someone else is living on the island, other than the Draken and the kobolds. So they gathered up the whole group and simply knocked on the door. This is becoming a bit of a trend in my games, actually. Players will find a door and be reasonably suspicious that there is some kind of dangerous thing behind it, and so their solution is to knock. I don't know why, I don't know how that started, but that seems to be the MO for my groups, and so this is a brand new group of players for the most part, but somehow that transition carried over. Is that the same for your games? Is that normal? I don't know, maybe my players are normal and I'm just weird. But as they knock on the door, they are met with a voice. A woman's voice. A dragonborn woman's voice speaking in broken common. After explaining to her who they are and swearing that they are good people, she tentatively lets them in, realizing she has no real recourse. Through a conversation with her and explanation of their mission, they come to realize that the large record of our history is not a book at all, but a person. In fact, she introduces herself as History the 16th. You see, her whole family has been named History. They are the record keepers, the lore masters of the Draken tribe. She explains her plight to the PCs. She ran away because she never got to live a normal life. And at this point she reveals that she's not alone. In fact, her daughter is with her. She begs the party to take away her daughter, to have her leave the island so she can go and have the life that she herself never had. It's not that the Draken are evil by any stretch of the imagination. They simply don't allow the Histories to live a normal life because the Histories are busy being the lore masters and record keepers of the entire tribe, so they don't get to have normal childhoods, normal lives. So the players think this through, and I sit back and let them discuss. This is sort of a moral test that I've introduced. They could do the lawful thing and keep the spirit of the agreement that they had made with the Draken and return, obviously, what the Draken desired, all of their record keepers, all of their lore masters, or they could do the good thing and spirit this girl away and sort of white lie about the fact that they had not found her and give her a new life somewhere, a better life somewhere. No real right answer, just a way that the characters can start to gauge their own morality and what their values are. It was very interesting to see what they would decide and what reasons they had for everything. They, in my mind, rightly reasoned that they could negotiate with the Draken and say that they had agreed to the letter of the law and returned their history, singular, that they had never been asked to return multiple books or records. And History the 16th herself was willing to lie and say that her daughter the 17th had died somewhere before the players had encountered her. So, to the mother's relief, the players agreed to take on the little girl. The wrap-up of the session was very exciting in its own right. The PCs were escorting History, the 16th and 17th, out to the cliff so they could scale back down, but as they were figuring out how do we get back down this cliff, that's when the kobolds showed up. The kobolds attempted to ambush the players when part of them were scaling down and part of them were still waiting for their turn on the rope. However, this time, the players made very quick work of the kobolds. They had new abilities, they had much more health, and they were much more confident in their capability, and rightly so. They destroyed those kobolds. They got down the cliffs, they got back into their boat, they sailed out to their ship first and discussed with their captain what the new arrangement was. The captain was markedly displeased by this, but basically didn't want to force the players to go back on their word. So he effectively said, "Fine, but the girl is your problem." So they returned History the 16th back to the Draken people, back to the Semya. And they were rewarded with their maps. However, I want to note something, and I'll link the map below. This is a map that I actually made in Hexographer. It was super fun, very easy program for somebody who's not at all artistic like me to make maps and make them very interesting and give a lot of dense information. But I have told the players this already. This is not an accurate map. There are two maps in existence. I made one that is objective and real, and it is mine, and I have not shown the players any of them. And the one that I am linking to, and the one that I showed the players, is not real. It is a simulation of what the Draken tribe would have had, what their aggregate knowledge would have been from rumors and history and time and word of mouth, and some explorers from long ago and some from recently, an amalgamation of knowledge and information on the region. So some information is vague and generic, some is specific, some is accurate, some is wrong, some is conjecture. I don't know who lives that way, but somebody does. And that's where we ended things. All the players hit level 3, they have a blue dragon egg, they have new maps and charts, they have a little girl with them who is now somehow in their care, and they need to figure out that dynamic. They also know that they are headed for the ramshackle port town of Volta. And that's where it stands. Hopefully next week we'll have a very interesting session in Volta where we get to do sort of a city exploration and a lot of role-playing. We'll see what the players decide to do there. I'd like to think that there were a couple of interesting lessons there and experiences that I had to share with you guys. I'm very excited to tell you what happens next week and catch you guys up on all the action. I'm looking forward to doing that. I hope you're enjoying these videos. I'm still enjoying making them. This is still a really fun process. And I will see you next time, friends.